la 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 la. Oh, you're here already. Oh my goodness, I was hoping I'd get back from the shops before you got here, but it's been crazy outside. You know the way the queues are at Christmas. I'm delighted you're here for the stories. Come on in inside. I have the room all set up for you. I'm delighted you're here already. We have the fire going and it's going to be just lovely. Give me a second now because I have to, oh, it's far too warm in here now. I'll have to take off my scarf and my hat and get the coat off. But look, I have a Christmas jumper. At least I'm dressed for the part. I'm going to keep you waiting here for me. I'm sorry, I just got a little bit delayed. You know the way things are at this time of the year. The butcher's was just such a panic. I ended up right behind Mrs. Clark, and you know the way she goes on and on. Well, today she was going on about the giblets for her turkey. I thought I would never be able to pick up the ham. But anyway, we're here now, and I'm sorry because I knew you'd be waiting for me. But I'm so glad you're here and that we're going to tell some gorgeous stories together. I put the fire on earlier so it's lovely and warm, and sure the tree lit as well, because at this time of the year I love seeing the lights and the sparkles everywhere. I think it's so lovely that we banish the darkness and bring light and hope into the world using lights that we light everywhere. But we're not the only people here that celebrate festivals of light at this time of the year. All across the world, people celebrate light in darkness as one of the most important, essential human traits. If we think of something like Diwali, you may have heard of Diwali. Diwali is the Hindu festival of light. And during Diwali's, families come together and they decorate their houses and the entire places where they live with millions and millions of lights. These lights are all around their door frames and all around the windows. The idea is that the light banishes the darkness and spreads hope and joy to the rest of the world. And if we think of even more festivals of light that happen around this time of the year too, you may have heard of Hanukkah. Hanukkah is the Jewish festival of light. During Hanukkah, families come together and they light candles on a menorah. This isn't exactly a menorah, but it's kind of an essence of a menorah. It's inspired by a menorah. You can see that there are candles to mark the different days of Hanukkah. And during Hanukkah, Jewish families come together and they light the candles on the menorah and they eat special food like crispy potato latkes, and they give each other gifts and gold coins and they play games. And I love when we look at our tree that we've decorated. The gifts reminded me of it because we put gifts underneath our tree. And if we look at this tree here, it's gorgeous, but you not think it's absolutely bonkers that we bring full live trees out of the forest and haul them into our houses at this time of the year. Can you imagine if aliens came down and saw us? They'd think we had lost the plot entirely. But people have been celebrating midwinter for millennia, for thousands of years. People would go into the middle of dark forests and they would celebrate the evergreen trees. And this tradition has come to us from Germany more recently. Back in the past, people would celebrate how these evergreen trees still looked alive in the middle of the winter when it seemed like everything else was asleep. There's a little story that I have about a little Christmas tree that I'd like to tell you about, which I think you'll really like. You might remember now, when the baby Jesus was born a long, long time ago, lots of people came to visit. You know, people always come and visit when there's a new baby, and they bring with them gifts and they bring presents and they come and see this new little infant. Close by, there were 3 trees who could see the comings and goings of all these visitors. The trees also wanted to bring gifts to bestow on the new infant. The first tree was the palm tree, and he said, "Oh, I know exactly what I will bring this newly minted baby. I will bring him a large leaf, one of my beautiful leaves, and it will rest over him and provide shelter during the warm summer time." And the little olive tree said, "Oh, I wonder what I could bring this baby Jesus as well. Oh, I should bestow on him some of my oil. My olive oil is sweet smelling and delicious." "What can I bring the baby Jesus?" wondered the little fir tree. "You," said the other trees, "you can't give him anything. Sure, your needles are so prickly they would hurt him, and your sap is so sticky, and it smells a bit icky too. Ugh, There is nothing that you could give this precious baby." The poor little fir tree was so sad because he wanted nothing more than to be able to give this special baby a special gift. Well, high up in the heavens, wasn't there a Christmas angel who was listening to the conversation that the three trees were having? And the angel heard how upset the little fir tree was and had a brilliant idea. As soon as it started to fall nighttime, the angel called down some of the stars to twinkle and rest across the branches of the little fir tree. And when the stars settled on the branches, they illuminated and shone with the most beautiful light. And this is like the first Christmas tree. The other trees were amazed by how beautiful the little fir tree looked, and the baby infant Jesus smiled upon the fir tree and the stars that illuminated its branches. And now we celebrate Christmas by decorating trees like this with all our beautiful lights to remind us of the very first Christmas miracle. But now that I'm looking underneath my tree, I see something that's very important altogether. Can you see I've got presents and gifts? And of course, giving gifts and presents is a very important tradition at this time of the year that I'm sure you all do in your homes. And you just might also hang some stockings up as well, maybe for someone to fill on Christmas Eve. We normally leave out stockings for Santa Claus to fill. And in the bottom of my stocking, I can see I have a mandarin orange. I wonder what Santa Claus, a stocking and a mandarin orange has to do with Christmas? Well, I know exactly a story about this. I'm going to come a little bit closer and make myself more comfortable to be able to tell you about this. So a long time ago, in a country just where Poland is now, there was a very kind and benevolent man, and his name was Saint Nicholas. We know him as someone else. We call him Santa Claus now. And Saint Nicholas lived in a little town, and in that town there happened to be 3 beautiful girls. Now the thing about it though was that these 3 beautiful girls were also incredibly poor. And back then, kind of like now, if you wanted to get married, you needed loads of money. And these girls had no money, so they couldn't get married because weddings are very expensive. I don't know if any of you have been to a wedding, but in a wedding you need like a dress and a cake and a car, and you need food for everyone, and you need to be able to have a big party afterwards, and you need to be able to have bands playing and people dancing, and all that costs an awful lot of money. So these poor 3 girls couldn't get married. Now, Saint Nicholas, as well as being kind and benevolent, was also very wealthy. And he hatched a plan. And in the dead of night, he crept up to the little cottage where the girls lived. And very, very quietly, he carefully tiptoed up to the house and climbed on top of the roof. And when he was on top of the roof, he made his way carefully over to the chimney, and from his pocket, he pulled out a bag of gold, and clinging onto the chimney for dear life, he dropped the bag of gold down the chimney. And you'll never guess where it landed. It landed in the stocking that one of the girls had hanging by the fireplace. You know, the same way that you might leave your towels on the radiator before you get out of the bath, and then you're all snuggly afterwards. Well, she'd left her stockings by the fireplace so that when she got up in the morning, she tiptoed over to the fireplace and she plucked down a stocking. She pulled on her stocking and had lovely toasty toes. And she pulled on her other stocking and gold in the toe of her stocking. She couldn't believe her luck. Well, she ran out of the house as fast as she possibly could. She found her boyfriend. She threw her arms around him. She gave him a tight squeeze and an enormous sloppy kiss. And now, because they had all that gold, they could go off and get married and live happily ever after. Well, sure, this was such a success. The following night, St. Nicholas decided that he again would creep up to the house where the two other girls lay sleeping, he climbed on top of the roof. Very carefully, he made his way across the roof and over to the chimney, where he clung on for dear life, and from his pocket he produced another bag of gold. He dropped the gold down the chimney, and you'll never guess where it landed. It landed in the stocking that the second girl had left by the fire to get toasty and warm overnight. When she woke up the next morning, she yawned. She walked over to the fireplace and she plucked down a stocking and she pulled on the stocking. Oh, lovely toasty toes. She pulled on her other stocking. Gold in the toe of her stocking. She couldn't believe her luck. She ran out of the house as fast as she possibly could. She found her boyfriend. She threw her arms around him. She gave him an enormous sloppy kiss. And they went and got married, and they lived happily ever after. Well, the following night, St. Nicholas knew that there was one girl still in the house. And he... Now, St. Nicholas was no spring chicken. And sure, the night before, climbing up and down on the roof, didn't he throw his back out? And he could barely walk the next day. So that evening he hobbled over to the house to where the last girl lived, and he was trying to think, could he get up on top of the roof again, but his back was so sore. When didn't he spot that one of the windows in the house was open just a little bit? So from his pocket he pulled out a bag of gold and he threw the bag of gold through the air. And it landed inside the house. It went through the window and it plopped into a shoe that the third girl had left underneath the window. Now, I told you she was very lovely, but anyone who has to leave their shoes in front of an open window must have very smelly feet as well. Anyway, she woke up the next morning and she went to the fireplace to pluck down the stocking, and she pulled on one of her socks. Toasty toes. And she pulled on the other stocking and no gold. This is a disaster. She was expecting the same thing that happened to her sister to happen to her, and now there was no gold. What was she going to do? Well, she realised that she'd have to go and see her sisters and try and work out this mess all together. So she went over to the side of the window and she put on one of her shoes and she put on the other shoe. She had stubbed her toe on a bag of gold that was inside her shoe. Well, she was absolutely delighted, and she ran out of the house as fast as she possibly could, even with a slightly sore toe, and she found her boyfriend and she threw her arms around him. She gave him a tight squeeze and an enormous sloppy kiss. And they got married and they lived happily ever after. And you see, this is why we now leave our stockings for St. Nicholas to fill, because it reminds us of the two girls who ended up getting their gold that came down the chimney and into their stockings. But in lots of other countries, boys and girls leave out shoes for St. Nicholas to fill, because they remember the daughter, the girl who had to wait for the third night until her gold came through the window. And it's also why on Christmas morning in your stocking you might find a mandarin orange, because the gold colour of the mandarin orange reminds us of the gold that first ended up in those stockings so long ago. Well, now that we've had a bit of a think about presents and Christmas and lights, there's another story that I want to tell you about. And this is because at this time of the year, not everyone lives in a country where the sun even shines. Sometimes in the countries that are so far north, in Northern Europe, in Sweden and in Denmark, and way far up near the Arctic Circle, no light shines at this time of the year at all. And I have a story from the far north that I want to tell you about a brave little girl called Lucy. To help me tell this story of Lucy, my friend Marta, who's an artist, made these beautiful silhouette cutouts for us. Lucy lived on the edge of the forest in a small wooden cottage with her mum, her baby brother, a milk white cat and a soft velvet cow. Lucy loved playing outside in the forest that surrounded her little home. And every morning she would wait patiently until the sun rose so she could go out and she could play the entire day long. One day she was waiting very patiently for the sun to rise, but the sun never broke through the darkness. And the next day she waited by the window for the sun to rise and the sun still didn't break through the darkness. And by the time the third day came along, the fire had refused to light and the cow had stopped giving its milk and her little brother was cold and cried with hunger. Lucy was brave and decided she would find out where the sun had gone to. So she took her skis and she headed through the forest and she brought with her her little cat. And she skied up the mountains and down the mountains until she came to the valley where the sun shone, and as she peeked over the edge of the mountain below her she saw an enormous troll. This troll was scary and he had hidden the sun in a blanket so it could no longer shine. Lucy hatched a plan. "Oh, you smelly feet!" she shouted at the troll. "Arr!" said the troll, and while he was distracted, Lucy's clever cat unwrapped the sun from a blanket and the sunlight flooded out across the valley and turned the ogre to stone. With the sunlight flooding the world again, Lucy headed back through the forest, up and down the mountain again, skiing as fast as she could until she eventually came to her little home on the edge of the forest, where her mum had just made lunch. And she sat and ate lunch with her little baby brother, the milk white cat and the soft velvet cow. And to this day, we celebrate St. Lucy's Day because in Sweden and in the Nordic countries, they believe that she is the bringer of life, because brave Lucy wouldn't let the darkness overcome the world. To this day, on the 13th of December in Sweden, they celebrate St. Lucy's Day. And for that, they have girls who wear crowns like this. The candles and the lights on the crown remind us of the stars that Lucy found, so that even in the darkest night, there's still specks of light and hope. And these stars, do you know that the sun is also a star? It's the one that's closest to the earth here. Isn't it interesting that at this time of the year, people gather together to celebrate family, the birth of a baby, and darkness and light in that darkness. And they also come together and they sing songs like this one. Tá Quinlan an Angle, Tá an Spare am Braga, Tá Fia Glan Shaska, Songli on Canog, Ardig an Tina, Is Ter Codalaba, Leafy Mac Dayan San Tigsha Anog. Well, I would spend all day here with you singing, but really I can't because I've lots of things to be getting on with. There is a tree to be finished decorating, so if you don't mind, will you head on and I can finish decorating my tree? Go on. Shh. Not like Hannah. Happy Christmas. I'll see you again.